super excited about tonight. We have a rock star group of panelists. We're very lucky to have all of these folks here tonight to be speaking to you all about adoption and open adoption. And I will hand it over to Claire and Abbie to take it away. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. Bobby and I will be here for technical help, and so feel free to chat us as well.
Thank you, Rory. Claire, do you want to say anything before we get started?
Nope, it's all you, Abbie. Thanks.
Okay. Well, first of all, I didn't plan to say this, but as I'm looking at all of your pictures, I'm seeing so many of you wearing masks, and it just reminds me that, you know, so many of you don't have the luxury that I have of working from my house, that you know, throughout this entire pandemic have been putting yourself in harm's way every single day to do this important work. And so I just really want to say thank you so much for showing up and just, you know, keeping it going. You are all incredible. I am super humbled to be part of this group today. My name is Abbie Moore. I am the CEO of AdoptAPet.com. I've been with AdoptAPet for it'll be 18 years in a matter of days. So I've been in animal welfare for a long time. Before that, I was involved in hands-on rescue. I also volunteer with the Supply and Demand Working Group at Human Animal Support Services. And I would really like to thank them for allowing me to moderate this panel, because this is a topic that is really, really close to my heart. In my capacity at AdoptAPet, you know, we hear from people, from adopters all over the country who are having just a really, really hard time adopting. And you know, I'm just so inspired by those of you who have, you know, worked really hard and, you know, utilize data and empathy to make adoption more equitable and more transparent. And I'm just incredibly excited to be here with this rockstar panel of people who, you know, won't just be talking about open adoptions as a concept. These people are boots on the ground and, you know, have actually done the work of implementing open adoptions into their own shelters. In some cases have been at the forefront of creating the definition of open adoptions. And they've really seen the impact that it has made on length of stay, on live release rates, and, you know, the relationship that they have with their communities. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is start off by asking each of you to introduce yourself, talk about, you know, give your title, and, you know, say a few words about how you first encountered open adoptions and you know, your role in open adoptions today. So let's start with Luis Quintanilla.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Luis Quintanilla, and I'm the executive director at the Humane Society of Harlingen. That's located in the southernmost county in Texas, in Cameron County. And yeah, we are swamped 24/7 all the time. Kitten season, basically this is the day that we have free. This is about the lightest it's going to be. Kitten season is about 364 days a year here. So we don't have time to slow down, but I'm very, very excited to be here and sharing a little bit. You know, it's been too long since we've been able to meet each other in person. So it's just nice to see everybody together, all for that common mission. So yeah, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis. Alisha.
Hi, I'm Alisha Vianello. I'm the program director for Gateway Pet Guardians. We are located in East St. Louis, Illinois, which is right next to St. Louis, and work in a really impoverished community. I implemented open adoptions about 2.5 years ago. So we went from really restrictive adoption policies, were mainly foster based, to really completely barrier-free, open as possible adoptions, and just saw incredible changes and improvements. So I'm excited to share that with you all.
Thank you. Allison.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Allison Cardona, and I'm currently with UC Davis Correct Shelter Medicine Program. But up until about a month ago, I was a deputy director for LA County Animal Care and Control, one of the largest animal control agencies with 7 full-service animal care centers. And yes, I have a personal and a professional connection to open adoptions. Just as a way of background, I first started maybe 20 years ago as a volunteer, and was associated with various rescue groups and did what I would say were some very restrictive adoptions at that time. It's definitely been a journey for me. I worked at the ASPCA for 14 years. And then at LA County, I was there, I think it was in 2018 where we really switched, or 2019 where we switched to open adoptions from a very structured interview process. So, and I was able to see firsthand what it took to implement that, and to really hear staff's concerns. And I can say that it's been incredibly successful, and that it's important for the community to really, the shift to being a resource for the community means opening up our doors to everyone for adoption.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Frommer. I am the Senior Director of Operations at the Humane Rescue Alliance in Washington, D.C. Before that, I'm actually a lifelong New Englander, so I've seen a couple of folks I know in the chat, but I took my first shelter job in 1988 when I was still in high school, and hi, Connie. Was at that time, we were also doing the small shelter that I was working for in my hometown was doing very restricted adoptions. And when I joined the MSPCA in 1997, I was part of a large shelter team that in 1999 was part of the American Humane Association's Leadership Forum on Adoptions. That was where sort of the term open adoptions grew out of. And our team at that time drafted part of that, one piece of that document by 5 different organizations. And then we backed it up with a project that we worked on with the Animal Care and Control Center in New York City, where we conducted some conversation-based adoptions according to our processes at the time with their adopters, and demonstrated that return rates did not change based on trying to break down some of these barriers and lessen these restrictions. So it's been a long time that I've been working in shelters and working with a more conversation-based adoption process, and seeing how it does lower length of stay, increases the number of animals we can help, and really engages our communities.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Clare Callison.
Thanks, Abbie. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all, and thanks for being on the call. I'm with American Pets Alive and help co-lead with Abbie the Human Animal Support Services Pet Supply and Demand Working Group, long title. I would also echo Allison that my connection to open adoptions or conversation-based adoptions is very personal and professional. It started in San Antonio, just working at the city shelter about 12 years ago. With a live release of only 28% and over 38,000 animals coming through the shelter. My first role was adoption counselor, and I had no idea what I was getting into. But the room, how it was positioned, the animals, the dogs that were getting walked to the euthanasia room every morning had to come through the adoption center. So that urgency was in my face every single day. I think over the years, I've maybe struggled, right, with not blaming people for putting animals in situations, but trusting them. And it's been a journey. And it's just been an honor to work with the fellow panelists and their different organizations and just learning more. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much. That gave me chills. Just very evocative image. So what we're going to do is I have a few questions I'm going to ask. I will start by directing a question to a specific member of the panel. After that member has given their answer, then I'll invite all the other members to join in and discuss and debate and ask their own questions. And we're going to go from the very general all the way through maybe some more specific topics. So I'm going to start with Stephanie Frommer. Let's start with the super basics. What is open adoptions? And then the second question I want you to answer is, what isn't open adoptions? What are some of the common misconceptions that people think of when they hear the label open adoptions that are not actually true?
Well, what it is, at least in my viewpoint, is first and foremost starts from a place of actually liking and trusting people. And so that we are approaching this work where we are engaging our communities and our stakeholders in helping us do the work of saving lives, trusting them with the animals that come through our facilities and our foster groups. And that's a hard place. That's, this industry has traditionally been about protecting animals from people, right? And I think that's probably the hardest shift for a lot of people and organizations to make, to kind of learn to trust. It is conversation based. It is matchmaking. It is not a checklist and a 15-page long application, right? It's starting from a place of yes, and assuming the best of intentions from the people that are coming to us and wanting to add to their family. We need to believe and trust that most people can make good pet owners, and that our job as adoptions facilities is to find the right animal to work with their family and with their household, and help them make that match and make that work long term. What it is not, again, I brought up that it's not a 15-page checklist. It's not home checks. It's not all of those things that we traditionally have done in this industry to make sure that we're controlling things, but it rather is, it's not a loss of control. It is a recognition that we probably don't have the control that we think we do in the first place over what happens once those animals leave our care. I think that a lot of us we've seen some horrible things that have happened to animals. And I think that there's a tendency to generalize that to all of the animals that come through our facility, and then therefore all the animals that are out in the community. And it's really important for us to recognize that those situations that may be really horrible, and there may be some horrible people out there in the world doing things to animals, but for the most part, people are good, people love animals. That's why they're coming to us in the first place. And we need to harness that love and share it with the people that we're working with, and work together to make those families better and stronger and more fulfilled.
So quick follow-up. So does that mean that you never turn someone down for adopting a pet?
No, it is not a free-for-all. It's not just a throw the doors open and let people help themselves, right? This is, again, it's matchmaking. So we will, I've turned folks down. We do in DC, we do some quick background checks to make sure that somebody isn't in our system as having been investigated for cruelty. But that's kind of the extent of that. But more often than not, we say, instead of saying no, we'll say, not this animal. Let me help you find an animal that's going to work for you and your family. And here's why. But that takes getting information from people and having an honest conversation, gaining their trust so that they will share the pertinent information about what they're actually looking for and what their life is like, so that we can make a successful match with them.
Thanks. Anyone have anything to add to that?
I was just thinking about, as an industry, we've talked about like adopt, don't shop, right? And I feel like that's kind of in the public consciousness. And I think conversation-based adoptions or open adoptions really ask the question, okay, how easy is it for the community to do that, right? And I'm sure everyone can think of an instance or know someone who has been denied by an organization for adoption. Pretty much everyone I've met in animal welfare has a story of sometime being denied adopting an animal. And so I think of it also as a numbers game. Like, if we really truly want to end this, we do have to open our doors and really take that leap of understanding.
Absolutely. And I would just chime in real quick that if I saw on Facebook, right, there's like a 10-year challenge and people were looking back at the last 10 years of their life and what has changed. And I didn't want to post a photo of myself, but it made me reflect of the last 10 years. And I've been married, I've moved 3 times, probably, I've changed jobs. I've hit, emotional lows. I've, lost friendships, and I've gained friendships. So much has changed, but people go through a lot of changes in their life. And that was just in 10 years. People get divorced, people have children, people move. And if someone were to tell me, or ask me what my next 10 years is going to look like, I wouldn't even try to predict what that would be. For many of us, we are one paycheck away from a really dire financial situation. So I think really putting ourselves in other people's shoes and just realizing, like, when Stephanie said letting go of control, that was the key for me, is realizing I can't even control my next 5 years, 5 months, let alone, and if the pandemic hasn't taught us that, then let alone someone else's life. So you have to lead with compassion. But yeah, as Alice and Stephanie, completely agree with what you said.
So let's move on. I'm going to ask this question specifically to Louise first. Stephanie, you mentioned that this all starts with liking and trusting people. And you acknowledged that, people in this, on this call, people in our industry have seen horrible things happen to animals. And we all know that, we're only as good as the people in our organization. It's not enough for someone at the top to say, okay, from this point on, we are going to be in open adoptions or conversation that pays adoption shelter. So how do you make that shift within your own staff? What cultural changes or paradigm shifts did you need to make within your own shelter staff in order to introduce open adoptions?
Sure. So I think it all begins with workplace culture and leadership. A shelter can be full of, a shelter can be well supported, well funded, all these kinds of things. But if the culture isn't there and the leadership isn't there to really sell that and really have that staff buy-in, it's never going to go anywhere. In South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley, I'm not sure how many people on this call understand how much of an emergency it is every single day. There are well over 150,000 animals roaming the streets every single year in this region who are going to end up in shelters. And right now there's only one no-kill shelter in the valley, and that's Harlingen. It's an emergency. So the people who've lived it, the people who've lived in those moments, the staff who've been here for more than a few years before that change really happened, when the valley started becoming more of an area of focus for big organizations to come down and mentor us and help us, before that change started to happen, those of us who are in it for the love of animals, we don't need much of a motivation to try to get away from the time when animals weren't being saved. And we need to, and it wasn't much of a gap to bridge to try to get us to the point of trusting our community, because we couldn't do it without them. So I'll never forget, my first animal welfare conference ever was AMPA in 2019. And I wasn't in the leadership role there yet, but I was about to be. And I'll never forget I think it was the opening session when I think it was Ryan Clinton discussed the euthanasia of kittens. And it was so absolutely a moment that I have lived, unfortunately, thousands of times in the past. And so did many of my staff and many of the people in the audience. That moment, that match lit moment, that's what are you waiting for, right? Like we have our own prejudices, we have our own ideas, and we have our own experiences that have colored how we behave and interact with our community. A lot of distrust happens, right? Because we see some of the worst things ever. But that gives you those moments and doing everything you possibly, being in those moments, living those moments where you have to euthanize animals on an industrial scale, that I think gives you the armor to say, you know what, why wouldn't I just try it? Even if I don't believe it at first, let me just try it for the sake of these animals, because I'm just a person too, and I'm from this area and I clearly care about animals. So just try, and I think that's the main thing that made it so easy for me to really make a change in Harlingen. It was already on the way. The staff was amazing, and we've been working, for the last couple of years. Of course, American Pets Alive has been here, APA has been here, Best Friends has been here, Maddie's has been here. There's been a lot of intervention, a lot of mentorship that we've been very fortunate to have in this community from the organizations who sort of paved the path before us. And it was just, okay, well, of course we want to change. There's animals at stake. So it's really just living this emergency that makes it very easy for us to say, let's go further, faster.
It's a great answer. And the passion that you have for animals really comes through. Does anybody else on the panel have more to add to that?
For us, we have a lot of fosters who handle adoptions, and with the cultural change, it was scary for some, but I think they learned, they saw that their foster pet still got adopted and they still got a loving home, and that they didn't get, the pet didn't get abused. It didn't get returned just because there wasn't a vet check done. They kind of saw the proof that everything was okay. And actually it took some of the burden off of them to not have to go do home checks and things. So I think as people experienced it, they became more comfortable with it. And as we kept preaching, what Louise talked about is your option is this animal could get, animals are constantly getting euthanized in shelters, or they could go to a home that may not be my perfect ideal home, how I would treat my animal, but do I want them to get euthanized or do I want them to live? And that's really what it comes down to, for staff who do have to think of animals getting euthanized just for space.
And
I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to piggyback off of that, I want them to live and I want them to be loved, right? And just because somebody doesn't make a lot of money or doesn't have a lot of money to put towards those animals doesn't mean that the animal's experience is any less wonderful. Being loved is the most important thing, and people of all income brackets are capable of providing that kind of stability and affection and care to an animal in their home. Animals don't care if they're eating, top of the line pet food and sleeping in the most, expensive dog beds. They just want people around them.
We'll come back a little bit later to some of those specific reasons why people get turned down for adoption. Alisha, I want to ask you, because I know that you are a data person.
Yes.
I think we're all data people here. How has open adoptions affected your ability to help both the animals and the people in your community?
So it's really helped both tremendously. We took away a lot of the traditional home checks. We made our application shorter. We took away vet checks, landlord checks. When we took away landlord checks, that was a big fear that dogs and cats would get returned. We probably only see 1 or 2 maybe per year that get returned because of landlords. So we really didn't see that. That was a big fear, and we didn't see that realized. Another fear is that we're going to adopt out a dog and it's going to get heartworms because we didn't do a vet check. And we also didn't see that happen. And then as far as the animals that we could help, we pull from a local animal control who 10 years ago had like a 20% save rate. They now have over a 90% save rate. And part of that is we could pull more animals. So we've actually doubled the amount of dogs and cats that we intake within 2 years when we removed these adoption barriers. And that's because we get more dogs and cats adopted and we get them adopted quicker. So our length of stay at the beginning of 2019 was about 170 days once they were ready for adoption. And now it's about 25 days. So they're getting adopted so much quicker. When they get adopted quicker, that means we can help more. So in turn, we've been able to help so many more animals and get so many more adopted out. Like I mentioned earlier, we do live in an impoverished community. There's a lot of backyard breeders. And we think about pets getting into the area. We would much rather people get pets who are vaccinated, spayed and neutered. So we know someone's going to get a pet, so why not get a pet that we know has those basic needs covered, and then we can also offer other resources. I just looked at some data from our service area. So our service area is 96% African American, where traditionally a lot of our adopters before maybe came from the more Caucasian side of Missouri or side of our area. In the last year from 2020 to 2021, our percentage of adopters from our service area has gone up over 500%. So it's made our adoption so much more inclusive when you don't make someone feel like they're getting judged because you're going to go check out their house, or when you want to know how much money they make or where they work or how much they're home, which can be really intimidating if you feel like you don't have enough money to be accepted to be adopted.
Quick follow-up. I want to go back to something that you just said, I don't know, a few minutes ago about, returns and how you haven't seen a drastic uptick in returns due to landlord issues. Returns in general, and anybody, please feel free to jump in with Alisha and talk about this. How does, in an open adoptions environment, how do you look at returns? I know, like when I worked in rescue, returns were like the worst thing that could possibly happen. Like everything that we did was to try and prevent pets from coming back into our rescue because we felt like, it would be so traumatic for, pets to go back and forth, from between homes and us. So how do you look at that?
That was a cultural shift for us. I think a couple years ago, it's like, oh my God, this dog's getting returned. And it was just so emotional for everyone. When we turned it into, that dog got out of the shelter, that dog, we learned more about it. So we try to treat that as a good thing to learn more about that dog or cat. Sometimes there are things we don't know about them before. And then also we do still manage the process to bring them back. So if someone adopts and it doesn't work out, they just can't drop them off the next day. We do have a process that like they might have to wait a few days to bring them back. So that was a cultural shift that we really had to explain to our volunteers and our fosters as to why it's not the end of the world. And I really have not seen in any sort of return, we haven't seen any sort of uptick in returns once we switched our policies.
I love what I'm seeing in the chat about unexpected fosters, because I was going to bring up that point that a lot of us have started doing short-term fosters, things like that. So why is that any different from the animal's perspective than if they are returned from an adoption that's not the right match? And all of the things that Alisha just said, that we get more information on the animal.
And honestly, the animal doesn't really know. Like, they might have a change in situation, but they don't know that they got returned. That's more of like, I feel like it's a human emotion more than what the animal knows.
I'd also just say that, changing that culture in organizations, I've seen a shift where, if a dog or cat were to get returned, there was a lot of finger pointing. Who did that adoption? Let's go back, look at their application. Where were the red flags? And there's this fear kind of, you're fearful to take any risks or to let the person that says, no, like, I think I can take this dog that has resource guarding in the shelter and work with them. And, there's less fear in taking some risks and working with people when you kind of shift away from a return as a shameful event, but more of an opportunity to learn more about them. So I've seen organizations really shift in that culture, and adoptions are just more fun.
Love that. Before we move on to the next topic, does anyone have anything to add to Alisha's data?
This is not, I have to find where it came from, but I just we were talking to a group recently that talked about they switched to foster based and it skyrocketed. I will make sure to find the information and get it to you all. Previously, there had been a lot of restrictions in place. This was a group in California. And once they switched to, people can foster first and try, it was like 98% success rate. And it just really was so impressive. And they tried something and it happened because of COVID. And it really has shifted their whole operations, which just makes me think of a point that Alisha, you said, people are going to get animals. They are. And the way that I look at it is I want them to be able to come to me to get them, because they're still going to get them. So I want to be a resource to the community. I want our shelter to be a resource to the community. They're spayed and neutered. They've gotten some vaccines. Maybe they're microchipped. So yeah, that's the way I think of it as well.
Right, like just because you say no as a rescue, that also puts a bad taste in others' mouth that then they would choose to shop. So why not give them that chance to adopt?
That's a great point. We at Adopt a Pet, I know we receive a lot of emails from people saying, I tried 3 different organizations, I wasn't successful. Like, how long should I hang in there before I just, go to my local pet store? Claire, I have a question that I want to direct to you. So, what do you say to people who are in animal welfare, who really feel like, they've taken on a pet, like maybe they pulled a pet from a shelter, and now it's their responsibility to find, the perfect adopter, and might fear that open adoptions would prevent them from doing that?
Sure. Yeah. And I understand that. I guess I hear that a lot, like, well, I don't care what a shelter does or what another organization does. That's their operation. I'm going to run mine differently. And I think there's just a shift of thinking that needs to happen. I think it's easy to maybe hear about Luis's experience in Harlingen in South Texas, and it might be hard to relate to. It might not be your reality, and I think it's just human nature maybe to feel like, well, Luis, I feel bad for you, but that's not my life, right? That's not my reality. And so I think just taking a step back and realizing no matter how small our organization is, that we all have a role to play, whether you be in Massachusetts or Maine, all the way to Washington, that everyone has a little bit of a role to play in this, and you can have a huge impact. We know from data, not to bring transport into this, but it is part of it, that transfers in 2021 are drastically down from 2019 and 2020. Length of stay is up. And I think about the smaller rescues that might feel like, well, I'm not affected by the shelter. And yes, very much, we're all connected in this. And, we still have over 1 million animals dying in our shelters unnecessarily. And we know that we're not going to get to a solution by doing the same things that we've been doing. So I would challenge everyone, including myself. I do this with my own organization I work at, is questioning our policies, not just once a year, but every month, because it's amazing how applications can sort of slip and we get more restrictive depending on the staff you've brought in. And all of a sudden you're back to square one. And also I would question just what makes this perfect adopter. We've talked about it a little bit. And I love how we've said, dogs and cats don't care if they live in a mobile home necessarily. They just want to be loved. And I believe in that. One of the best exercises I think people can do with their staff or even their fosters is going around and asking people to either to sit down if they have, ever snuck an animal into a rental, or have ever been not able to pay an unexpected vet bill without, some sort of financial challenge, on and on. There's a bunch of questions, and I'll put it in the chat. One of the best resources is from CARE, Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity. And they have actually a video that walks through this. It's really powerful. So those are my things. We talk about what not to do a lot, but I would run through that exercise with staff and fosters. And really, it just makes it personal. A lot of us wouldn't qualify to adopt at our own organization. So long-winded answer to that. Great question, Abbie.
Great answer. And I agree that that video is amazing. Anyone else have anything to add on that topic? I have a really important and good question to ask next. And I'm going to start with Allison on this one. So, going back to that topic of finding the perfect adopter, we all have in our minds what that is. And oftentimes it's, close to who we are or who we want to be. How do we prevent our own unconscious bias from becoming a roadblock to adoption for other people who are not like us?
Wow, such a great question. And I feel like it's huge. It's a huge thing to answer and to think about. I think where I want to start is with my own personal experience. I mentioned that I started as a volunteer. I started doing trap, neuter, return, and then adopting out the kittens that were young and friendly. And I hooked up with this rescue organization that gave me, a very long application. And I was like, okay, this is how I do this. I remember at the time I was working at an architecture firm, and one of the partners of the firm wanted to adopt 2 of the kittens. And I told him no, because he said that they might occasionally go outside. This man was a millionaire and lived in this huge mansion. And I said no to him. That was one thing in my mind. And what it said on the application, they can never go outside. It's like, you can't have my kittens. I then, after that, started working at the ASPCA. And I remember that there was one time, and I shared this with you, Abbie, that a couple came in, and I was an adoptions counselor, and they smelled of alcohol, really powerfully. And I got really upset. And I went to my boss and I said, I don't think that they should adopt. They have been drinking. And she was like, well, what else is going on? She asked me a few questions. And then she's like, let them adopt. That's all right. You don't know what's going on. And now in hindsight, what I recognized, and I'll share this, is that I had my own struggles with drinking, and I was questioning my own, drinking problems. And so a lot of times what I've come to realize with myself is that what I'm looking at or what bothers me in other people is maybe something that I'm working on or that I see in myself, and that is a struggle. So I think there's a couple of things with bias is getting really honest. And I, invite people to do work on this themselves. I've had to definitely. It's not so much getting rid of it. I think a lot of times when we talk about bias, it's like, oh, we have to, eradicate it. But it's more so about getting really, really honest and even noticing my reactions or each individual's reactions to different people. And how can I then put that aside? And so it's like, oh, I have this understanding or this idea or this mental picture of what a person does, is, can I see that? Can I notice it? And then be like, okay, I'm going to put that aside for right now. So I think it's also a more compassionate way for us to look at ourselves and to understand that bias, unconscious bias, just exists. It exists. It's sprinkled in every fiber of our being. And I think having a conversation with ourselves. So yeah, I guess just on a personal level, that's what I've done. And also talk to someone else or tap out like, hey, this is really triggering me in some way. There's something about this person that I'm associating them with X. I need to tap out on this and have somebody else come in. Like, that's okay too.
Thank you so much for sharing that incredibly powerful and vulnerable personal experience. I watched a lot of people's mouths kind of drop open, like, oh my gosh. That's so, I think it really resonated with a lot of people here. I think we all have things that touch something in ourselves. Anyone else want to talk about unconscious bias? Okay, so I have a question that I'd like all of you to answer. Just sort of free form, jump on in. And that is, I'd like to know what the difference is between how you do adoptions now and how you used to think about adoptions. And specifically, what are some of the questions that you used to include on your adoption application that you no longer do? What adoption processes or policies did you once maybe have that you no longer would consider having? What are some of those things that you used to think of as red flags for in an adopter that no longer trigger that reaction in you?
I can share one question that we used to ask was if you had ever surrendered a pet before. And then that used to be an automatic no. We don't ask that at all anymore. And the reason for that is, like, I've rehomed a pet that I owned before. A lot of people may have had a reason that they had to rehome a pet, and it doesn't mean that you should never be able to adopt a pet again. Or if they had returned a pet that they adopted from us previously, you weren't able to adopt from us again. So instead, we look at like, well, why did you have to return a pet you adopted from us before? Was it, not the right fit for you? So we got rid of, have you return before altogether. And then another one that we saw a lot was if your pet is spayed and neutered. That's something, if someone's pet wasn't spayed and neutered, they were never able to adopt. And that's something we got rid of because, for one, our pets are spayed and neutered, so they're not going to make babies with that animal. And we can educate the person on spay and neuter, but at the end, that is their choice. But they are choosing to adopt an altered animal. So, like, they're obviously doing the right thing. And a really good story I have from that is we had someone who came to an adoption event who said, I want to adopt your longest stay dog. We're like, oh, okay. They're like, they just have to be good with my dog. We're like, okay, like, buddy, it would be perfect. We've had him for a year. We don't know why he's been overlooked. And she's like, well, my dog's not neutered. And I was like, well, that's okay. And she's like, oh, well, I've been denied from multiple rescues because of this. So if we would have had that barrier, we would have never adopted out our longest stay dog. So I like now thinking of like, if we would have had to turn her away, that would have been detrimental.
So the pandemic and our need to shift to an online platform for conducting adoptions has kind of like pulled us away a little bit from the direction that we were going, where it was actually, we don't have an adoption application. We simply collect, name, address, phone number, that kind of stuff that we need to put into the database, but that we actually don't have people fill out anything to begin with, but it starts with a conversation, and starts with what kind of animal are you looking for? Tell us a little bit about your home, and starting with open-ended questions, not yes, no questions, not single answer questions, single word answer questions, but really trying to engage folks in a conversation that then leads to other questions, and it gives them an opportunity to ask questions of us so that we can really work at making that match. And that's tough to kind of get to. Because it requires a certain type of personality to conduct those interviews, right? It's not about pass or fail. It's about really getting to know somebody and really being sincere in that willingness to to trust a person and want to know really and make the right match. And so that kind of goes back to some of the paradigm and cultural shifts, is that you really need to start hiring for or engaging volunteers that really want to have those types of conversations one-on-one with people.
I'm seeing just incredible questions being posted in the chat. I wish we had 3 hours to talk about this. Claire, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I would just say, we discovered by looking at our, and I think shifting language is important, right, for everyone, but application to questionnaire, I love changing that verbiage. It's a simple switch. It takes a little retraining, but I think, just the presentation of how this interaction is going to go, it eases people up quite a bit, and it makes it more of a pleasurable experience. But I would say that we found, by looking through question by question, we found so many things that didn't provide value, that were just there from years ago, such as, would you object to a random visit at your home? Like, we were never doing random visits like that. So it was just sort of like a kind of a like a little investigative question, trying to catch someone. And then, have you ever, what would you do if you had a $400 vet bill? I don't know, charge it, pay, borrow, it's hard to answer that question. You don't know what you're in that situation. So lots of hypotheticals that weren't giving us value. My favorite question replacing those would be, what would you like to learn more about today in the adoption? And you give them check boxes sort of as an icebreaker, crate training, behavior training, litter box, what to feed my pet, things like that. How to introduce my dog to my cat. So giving them little ways to just finding more out about what they want to hear and what they want to talk about. I love that question because it really seems to open people up to talk.
Luis?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of the big things that we had, just one of the many examples, I mean, overall, the tone of our old way of doing adoptions was, how do we find a way to not send you home with this pet that really needs a home? And little by little we chipped away at that. I mean, not little by little, but it was too slow for what we needed. And we transformed it all. There were so many things. One example was a fence. Do you have a fence? Do you have something like that? Well, no, but I live in an apartment. Or no, but I'm gonna have them inside. What is it? There's so many reasons to deny an adoption, and so many reasons you can invent to keep that animal in your shelter. And that ideal adopter, I mean, for example, up until a couple of years ago, I was running a shelter. I was a shelter manager, and I was living with my mom because I was so damn poor, and I wouldn't have been able to apply for a lot of, so I was in charge of like 30,000 animals, but I wouldn't have been able to be qualified for a lot of rescues to take one home because I didn't have my own place. So it just, and I wasn't financially stable. Come on, it's not about the finances. It's not really so much about the setting. It's just about the heart and that buy-in, and looking at it the way was mentioned before as, okay, great. A return adoption is never a happy moment, but hey, guess what? That dog got a field trip. Awesome. Great. And it bought us precious time that we needed. So it's really just taking that leap of faith that you're in this for the right reasons. So the guys or the girls or the families walking into your shelter or reaching out to you online, whatever it may be with your rescue or organization, they're probably coming from a place of goodness as well.
Allison, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Yeah, what I was thinking of, and I think Claire alluded to this a little bit, is also the power dynamic that exists, right? When there's an application or even a questionnaire, me as the consumer, I'm always trying to figure out what the right answer is, right? Like, my goal when I come to a shelter or to a rescue group is to get an animal. And I now have to figure out, like, how do I do that? So I think a lot of the times we think, I hear people say, oh, I think they're lying, or they're not telling the truth, or they're evading stuff. And I think we just really need to recognize the power dynamic that exists. And it may not be the best time to gauge whether someone is like, oh, are they lying or not? And then for something that really was a shift for me, I think, is the idea around guard dog, right? So it's like, oh, if somebody wants a guard dog, or this means like a dog that's trained to attack, or this is wrong, or they're just going to put them in all of these things that I associated with those words. And I remember very specifically meeting this woman at an event, and she had her Chihuahua there for vaccines. And she said to me, "Hey, do you have any big dogs? Do you have any, just like a really big dog that kind of maybe looks a little mean?" And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, I live with my young son and I have this Chihuahua and he sleeps inside, but I really want a big dog to keep outside because our home was broken into a couple of weeks ago and this little guy didn't bark at all. So I really just want a dog, or keep him outside and we'll, take good care of him, but I want a big dog, a big scary dog." And that would have been something on an application where it's like guard dog. And in the past, it would have been like, "Nope, done, you're out of here." But just hearing where she was coming from, I was going to do everything I could to find her a dog that she could adopt.
So I see we are running out of time. Really quickly, Allison, how can organizations get started on the path to open adoptions?
I love this conversation today. A couple of things. I would say one, do your own application. See if you would, fill it out, go through that practice of what that's like. The other thing is, I just really think about what the ultimate goal is, right? Is to get pets in homes, and how we can do that together. And I think maybe an actionable item is to reach out to someone else. There's a lot of people who were on this thread today or posting things. It would be great to see people share their questionnaires or just share their process. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so many resources out there.
Rory, do we have, no, Rory says we do not have time for audience questions today. But we will, yes, let's see if we can convince everyone to return for a part 2 of this. I think that there's, there are so many questions asked in the chat that I would love to know the answers to. So let's come back and do this again. Rory, do you have any closing comments?
Just that this was absolutely amazing. We will try to, we've been collecting all of the questions in the chat. We will schedule a part 2 and let everybody know when that will be hosted. Hopefully we can do that sooner rather than later while this conversation is still fresh in our minds. This has just been so incredibly impactful and important. So thank you all for being here tonight, and especially thank you to our amazing panelists. This has just been so heartwarming and encouraging. So thank you all.